You don't lose muscle just because you're aging. You lose muscle because the signal to grow has been turned off by your routine, your habits. But there's good news out. You can turn it back on. The moment you wake up, your body is ready to make a decision. Should it break down or build up? And the answer lies in what you do in the first hour. Take muscle triggering nutrients with breakfast, not at random times, but in harmony with your biology. Lysine, creatine, vitamin D3, omega-3s, protein. These aren't just supplements. They're signals to your body that it's time to grow again. Sit by sunlight. Stand up. Breathe deeply. Move your body even for 2 minutes. You're not just fueling your muscles, you're lighting up your brain. You're sending a message to your nervous system that you're not done yet. The world may say muscle loss is normal. That weakness is part of aging. But your body has a different story to tell. If you feed it right, if you time it right, if you move right, take this with breakfast and your muscles will come back because they never left you. They were just waiting for the signal. How do we triggering muscle recovery through morning nutrient timing isn't just about taking supplements early. It's about aligning your internal biological clock with the specific nutrients that activate anabolism and reduce muscle breakdown. In the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking, your body is in a unique hormonal state. Cortisol is elevated, insulin sensitivity is heightened, and growth-related pathways such as MTR are highly responsive. When you provide your system with the right combination of muscle-supportive nutrients, such as a high leucine protein source, creatine monohydrate, omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamin D3, you don't just feed your muscles, you communicate with your neuromuscular system, telling it that resources are available for growth, repair, and performance. This morning window is a kind of biological open gate during which the brain is particularly alert to incoming signals of nourishment and safety, which in turn suppresses catabolic pathways and promotes protein synthesis. When combined with exposure to natural light, hydration, and light movement, such as a short walk or mobility routine, the effect is amplified. These signals converge at the level of the hypothalamus and muscle fibers alike, generating a coordinated response that reactivates dormant muscle memory and initiates the cascade of metabolic processes essential for hypertrophy and functional strength recovery, especially for those who've experienced muscle loss due to age, inactivity, or stress. The presence of amino acids, especially branched chain amino acids like lysine, in the bloodstream during this early phase not only activates muscle building directly, but also improves neurotransmitter balance, particularly in the dopamine and acetylcholine systems, enhancing motor drive and motivation for movement throughout the day. Leverage cortisol's morning peak to build rather than break down by understanding its role not as an enemy, but as a powerful ally when timed correctly with nutrient intake and movement. Cortisol follows a natural circadian rhythm, typically peaking within 30 to 45 minutes after waking, known as the cortisol awakening response current. This surge is designed to mobilize energy, increase alertness, and prepare the body for the demands of the day. While chronic elevation of cortisol can lead to catabolism, especially when paired with fasting, stress, or undernourishment, its natural spike in the morning can be harnessed as a signal to drive muscle recovery and energy utilization. By pairing this cortisol rise with high-quality protein, fast-digesting carbohydrates, and anabolic cofactors like creatine, magnesium, and B vitamins, you redirect cortisol's energy, mobilizing function away from breaking down muscle tissue and toward rebuilding it. The nutrients taken during this hormonal window are more likely to be shuttled efficiently into muscle cells, supporting glycogen replenishment, muscle protein synthesis, and cellular repair. How do we? In fact, studies show that muscles are more insulin sensitive in the morning, allowing nutrients to be absorbed more efficiently when timed with this cortisol peak. Physical movement, such as walking, stretching, or resistance band activation immediately after nutrient intake acts as a synergistic cue, further enhancing cortisol's beneficial effects. This process creates a neurochemical environment that reinforces the feedback loop between the brain and body, promoting a state of readiness and recovery instead of depletion. When cortisol is matched with nourishment and light activity, it reinforces metabolic flexibility and supports mitochondrial biogenesis, helping your cells produce more energy, regulate inflammation, and prioritize tissue regeneration. This approach shifts the narrative around cortisol entirely, transforming it from a misunderstood stress hormone into a metabolic catalyst for rebuilding strength, restoring vitality, and maintaining lean mass as part of a deeply biological, time-sensitive process. Anchor habits with circadian rhythms by aligning your daily behaviors, especially those involving nutrition, movement, and recovery, with the internal biological clock that governs nearly every system in the body, from hormone release to cellular repair. The circadian rhythm is regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus and synchronized primarily by light exposure, but also by consistent patterns in eating, sleeping, and physical activity. When habits are tethered to this internal clock, they become not just easier to maintain, but also more biologically effective because the body anticipates and prepares for them. For muscle recovery and growth, this means timing protein intake, supplementation, hydration, and movement cues to moments when the body is naturally primed for nutrient absorption and metabolic activity, typically early in the day and again in the late afternoon. For example, consuming muscle rebuilding nutrients in the first 2 hours after waking takes advantage of elevated cortisol and heightened insulin sensitivity, while performing physical activity during daylight hours, especially after nutrient intake, enhances neuromuscular efficiency and supports sleep quality later on. Exposure to morning sunlight reinforces the master clock by triggering melatonin suppression and a natural rise in alertness, promoting neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine, creating the physiological and psychological foundation for habit execution. When these behaviors are repeated at the same time each day, the body begins to anticipate them, resulting in a form of biological automation that reduces friction and increases consistency. Over time, this predictability leads to a state known as entrainment, where internal systems synchronize with external routines, amplifying the effects of each behavior and minimizing the effort needed to sustain them. This is especially critical for restoring muscle in aging populations or after periods of inactivity, where biological resistance to change is higher and the neuromuscular system requires predictable inputs to regain function and responsiveness. Rhythmic habits also influence gene expression at the level of skeletal muscle and mitochondria, activating anabolic pathways and repair mechanisms during specific windows and reducing inflammation and oxidative stress during others, allowing for greater efficiency and long-term sustainability of muscle health and metabolic balance. And use visual cues to drive neuromuscular engagement by leveraging the powerful connection between what the eyes see and how the brain activates movement pathways. Vision is not just a passive sensory input. It plays an active role in priming the motor system for action, balance, and coordination. The visual system has direct connections to regions of the brain responsible for planning and executing movement, including the motor cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. When the eyes fixate on a target or scan the environment, they send spatial information to these regions, preparing the body to move in relation to what's being seen. This is why athletes often look up toward a goal or a direction before initiating movement. The eyes guide intention and precision. In the context of muscle recovery and reactivation, especially after periods of disuse or during aging, visual cues become a critical tool to reestablish the brain-body connection. Simply focusing on a particular body part during movement can enhance neural recruitment of the associated muscles through a phenomenon known as the visual motor loop. For instance, watching your legs as you perform controlled squats or observing your arms during resistance real-time feedback to the brain that reinforces motor pathways and refines proprioception. Visual input also enhances balance and stability by giving the brain a reference for posture and orientation, which is particularly important when we're training underused muscles. Incorporating visual elements into your training environment, like mirrors, balance targets, movement grids, or even outdoor terrain, further stimulates cortical activation and encourages mindful engagement with the physical task. Moreover, alternating between focused visual attention, narrow gazant, and panoramic vision, broad gazant before or during light movement sessions can shift the brain between alert and calm states, helping regulate arousal levels and optimize neuromuscular readiness. This intentional use of vision primes the vestibular and proprioceptive systems. How do we making every movement more efficient and neurologically integrated? Visual cues also work synergistically with auditory and tactile inputs, meaning that when paired with rhythmic music or light touch, they accelerate neuroplasticity, improve coordination, and increase muscle fiber recruitment, especially in exercises that require precision timing or balance. Activate muscle memory with movements by tapping into the brain's ability to reawaken dormant neuromuscular pathways through small, deliberate physical actions that require minimal effort but high neural precision. Muscle memory is not just stored in the muscle fibers themselves. It resides primarily in the central nervous system, where previous patterns of movement are encoded through repeated firing of motor neurons, synaptic efficiency, and proprioceptive feedback loops. When muscles have been inactive due to age, injury, or disuse, lengthy and intense exercises can be overwhelming or counterproductive, but micro movements offer a neurologically efficient way to re-establish communication between the brain and body without inducing fatigue or mechanical strain. These small-scale actions, such as flexing, finger tapping, ankle circles, scapular retractions, or isometric holds, trigger reactivation of specific motor units and send afferent signals back to the central nervous system, essentially reminding the brain that these muscles are still available for use. The beauty of micro movements lies in their ability to increase cortical representation of underused muscles, particularly in older adults or during early rehabilitation stages, where safety and consistency are more important than load. Engaging in these movements shortly after waking or after a nutrient-rich breakfast helps synergize biochemical readiness with neural stimulation, reinforcing the link between metabolic inputs and functional outputs. Additionally, when performed rhythmically and mindfully, micro movements can stimulate mechanoreceptors, increase blood flow to local muscle tissue, enhance synaptic plasticity, and even upregulate gene expression related to muscle repair and growth. This makes them a potent primer for larger movements later in the day as they lay the neural groundwork for more complex coordination, strength, and endurance. These tiny yet intentional actions can be easily integrated into daily routines during standing breaks, while brushing teeth, or even seated at a desk, providing frequent, low-threshold opportunities for reactivating muscular systems and reinforcing neural circuits without requiring full workouts or gym equipment. Over time, these repeated low-load stimuli contribute to improved movement quality, better joint control, enhanced kinesthetic awareness, and a more responsive neuromuscular system that's primed to support greater physical demands with reduced injury risk and increased movement confidence. Support the dopamine muscle feedback loop by recognizing the bidirectional relationship between movement and motivation, where neuromodulators like dopamine not only drive the desire to move, but are also released as a result of movement itself, especially when combined with purpose, reward, and rhythmic effort. Dopamine is not simply the chemical. It plays a central role in initiating action, sustaining focus, and reinforcing behaviors that the brain deems valuable or necessary for survival, such as physical exertion, skill mastery, and strength development. When you engage in even light muscle activation, especially in the morning or after a nutrient-dense meal that includes tyrosine-rich proteins, omega-3s, magnesium, and B vitamins, you're creating the ideal neurochemical environment for dopamine synthesis and receptor sensitivity. The motor system is tightly wired into the dopaminergic circuitry of the brain, particularly within the basal ganglia and motor cortex, where movement intentions and outcomes are evaluated for efficiency and reward. When muscle fibers contract and movement is executed with intention, sensory feedback from the body through proprioceptors, mechanoreceptors, and spinal circuits feeds back into the brain, reinforcing the loop and strengthening the dopamine pathways that regulate energy, drive, and consistency. This is why consistent low-intensity movement, especially when framed as progress or self-care, can gradually overcome inertia and fatigue, as each successful repetition fuels a neurochemical response that enhances mood, boosts cognitive alertness, and increases the likelihood of repeating the behavior. Layering this with goal setting, such as micro wins like completing 5 reps or standing up from a chair unassisted, activates the brain's reward prediction circuitry. Encouraging further engagement. The loop becomes even more potent when combined with light exposure, hydration, and rhythmic breathing, all of which amplify dopamine tone and support neuromuscular efficiency. Over time, this feedback system trains the brain to associate movement with intrinsic reward, making physical activity not just a chore, but a source of drive, self-belief, and identity reinforcement. This approach is especially crucial for individuals experiencing muscle loss, low energy, or psychological barriers to exercise, as it bypasses brute willpower and instead uses the body's own reward circuitry to reestablish a sustainable rhythm of action and recovery that supports both muscular integrity and long-term behavioral change.